Hello, FMX. Welcome back to another session in the spatial storytelling track. I'm very excited to be here with my friend Tupac Martir. I've known Tupac for about 7 years now. First met in 2019 when I was fortunate to work on a New York version of Cosmos Within Us and have been following his work with great interest ever since. He's an incredibly talented creative and technologist, and I'm excited to speak to him more today about some of what he's been up to and some of his perspectives on what's going on with spatial storytelling. So, welcome, Tupac. How are you today?
I'm good, man. How are you? Yes, yeah. I think funny enough, I think we first met when you were doing Love Seat, although we
Oh,
met
sure.
remotely
Yeah, that's
before
right. Yeah, that
we
was 2019.
before yeah. So the summer of 2019. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's interesting times in this space in which we find ourselves, I would say.
absolutely. Well, let's start with some broad observations. So, you've been in this industry a very long time. What are some of the trends and ways that you've seen things changing and evolving? And is it what you thought it would be, from 10 years ago? Is it kind of moving in a different direction?
I think it's moving in a different direction. Actually, I would say it's stalled in places more than
Mm,
moving. I
yeah.
think that one thing that I'm really amazed of is if we take a really step back and I think about 2010, 2009, when we was first talking about this conceptual idea of tracking and tracking technologies, and everyone looked at me like I was a weird alien from God knows where, and
Yeah.
why I didn't want to put things that were already in motors. And then, the evolution of tracking in 2011 and everything that we did, Nierka in 2012, and everyone coming to see literally Act One to see how everything was moving. If you take that of how difficult it was for us to understand tracking, to now we get mad if things don't track the way that we want them. And
Yeah.
and we're moving to that space of microless tracking, and when we're looking at motion capture and we're looking at performance capture, and we keep moving to this camera based types of ways of doing things, to think of that back in 2009, 2010 is pretty ridiculous. I mean, we always hoped that computer vision would help us, but we weren't sure if that was ever going to be the case.
Yeah. Amazing. That's a great introduction to some of the topics and trends we'll be covering here. But let's rewind. Let's pretend, even though you're an amazingly, wonderfully famous person, let's pretend someone watching this has no idea who you are. Let's back up and kind of trace your journey. Let's talk, Elton John, Beyonce, and just all the fun little events that led to you founding Satori Studio and getting up to what you're doing now.
So I went to art school in Omaha, Nebraska, go Creighton. And I start coding at the age of 6 through notebooks and little magazines that I would buy in Mexico City. And so when I went to art school, digital art was one of my main points. Obviously, painting was my main one with photography, but then digital art became another part. And then I think a lot of the analog digital way that I work comes from that. The fact that it took me 3 hours to scan my hand, and then I traced it with paper, and then I scanned that traced paper of my hand, and then I combined that with my original scan, and then I took a picture, and then I took a print of that picture, and then I took a picture of that print, and then I painted on top of that, and then I printed that again, and then that got bigger, and then I took a picture of that, and then all these kind of things, and then eventually putting it into a space so that the digital to digital to analog kind of can become in the principal element of it. Um, I returned to Mexico after I graduated. I worked in the opera house, in which, as I tell people, I basically took a master's course while being in the opera house because I helped everybody. I helped the
Mhm.
lighting designer, the video designer, the costume designer, the wig designer, the makeup artist. I looked after sopranos, I looked after conductors, I looked after tenors, I looked after dancers. I worked with paper. I learned how to paint paper with traditional techniques. And I used to have to grind all these things with a glue that is called bunny glue, which
Mhm.
comes from the raw bone of the bunny, and it becomes this really um, funny patterned kind of thing. And then you rub that into hot water, and then that dilutes, and then you mix that with the paint and everything, and then that's how you paint paper. So the paper actually
Mhm.
becomes a lot stronger. Um, and so all that kind of took me into that side. And I left that, started working in events. That led me to becoming the art director of MTV. in 2005, if I remember well. And then that kind of led into me meeting bands and realizing that lighting was an important element of my work. And so then lighting and set design, all those kinds of things added to working with bands, working with artists, doing video clips, all that kind of thing. And then in 2008, I made the jump to the UK. Two bags, 2,000 quid, and thinking that I was going to make it. Uh, little did I know. But then that by itself led to working with different people, working with Manolo, who was a lighting designer, especially for fashion. That led to working with Topshop and Vivian Westwood and Alexander McQueen and, all the fashion people that I started working with until eventually I took over and I started doing those jobs on my own. In the middle of that, there's a period of working with Elton John, working with Sting, uh, Chili Peppers, Beyonce, Coachella, all those kinds of things. And then suddenly I arrived to November of 2011 to do Nierka with this conceptual idea that technology can be a single act without the need of humans. I mean, in the end, we needed the humans, but we needed the humans to move the screens so that we could actually track them and project on top of them. But there's a moment specifically in Act One when there's two screens at the front and they move sideways and then come back, and there's two screens at the back that move forwards, and the entire theater just went, because it was just like no one had ever seen something like that. Every single thing that we've ever seen was people were trying to move a screen while a projection was moving and trying to match it at the same time. So the conceptual idea of zooming in, zooming out, keystoning. I remember we had two screens going one in front of the other, so we could prove that the content could hide behind the other and then come out on the other side. So like that element of what the creativity meant to the technology and not what the technology meant to the creativity. It's like we figure out that it could track. Okay, now that it was like, what else can we do within this tracking element that would allow us to make something different? And that sort of opened this door towards people coming to me about testing new things or trying new techniques or trying new cameras. And I then started doing my master's in theater design at the Royal Welsh. And so suddenly it was like all these conceptual ideas that I have from the art world, all these things that I had learned from being a commercial designer for so many years. And then suddenly this opening of show creation with technology as a character of it, and that's a part that I always talk about, is like the technology is another character, just like a dancer, just like a musician, just like an actor. For me, technology becomes an actor. Because why? Because you decide the type of engine that you want to use, the type of technology that you want to use, the type of graphics cards that you're using. That's as big an idea as an actor trying to understand what is his background, what is his character coming from, what are all these things that need to exist. Because by choosing those technologies, not only are you choosing them for what they're going to do, but you're also choosing because you know the limitations of it.
Yeah.
And you know how far you can push it and how, where is it going to stop and what are the limitations of that element, and whether you find a bridge to something else or you decide that that is your limitation and use that as your limitation.
Yeah. Some of the trends we definitely have seen already so far with the spatial storytelling track is we, by necessity, have people who have a technological, bent where they understand how to like fiddle and make things work, and then also the creative side. And you kind of need to have both of those things. And then as you're hitting on as well, Tupac, there is this idea that if you're pushing the limits of like what technology can do, any kind of emerging technology, XR, AI, whatever it may be, you need to be aware of the limitations because you need to know when something's going to break. And especially if there's a live production element to it, and like a video game where you can just patch it and like re-release it in a few days, like you need to know what's going to work live in the moment, which can be really hard. So I think we both
It
experienced that
is.
tension. Yeah.
But I think that, and I think this is one thing that we keep raising as a studio, and that is that technology keeps advancing, but the creativity is not catching up with it, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So it's almost like technology is trying to solve problems that it thinks that we're going to have in the creative world, whereas the creative world is trying to see the world in a different way. And it reminds me of this period of time. We're talking very early days of Granime 2, in which I kept asking the guys at MA Lighting for something in the desk to be programmed for me. And they will come in like, no, but we have all these new features. And I was like, yeah, thank you. But can you please do this for me? no, 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 no,
Mhm.
we have all these new, and he was always, look at us, we have all these new features, right? And then one day I was going to program a show and I was like, can I please get someone from systems to come and
Mhm.
sit right next to me? And so that guy came in and he was like all excited because it's a big artist and, he had never been to rehearsals. And we're sitting there and we start programming and I go, okay, so watch this. Tack, 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 please. And he goes, okay, that's the correct way of doing it. It's like, yeah, but if you can give me a button that I can go tack, 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 please. He goes, yeah. So that's gonna save me 8 seconds. And
Mm.
he goes, uh-huh. It's like 8 seconds. I get you. If I'm only doing 7 cues, not a problem. But I have 9,000 of this fun.
Yeah, right.
9,000 times 8 seconds is a long, long time. I was like, you're saving me days. And he was like, oh, didn't realize that. He goes
Mhm.
in, try this. Is that correct? Yeah, but just do it. Okay, there you go. Boom. After that, tack, 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 please. Tack, 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 please. Tack, tack. And he was like, oh, wow, that's a lot quicker. I was like, yeah, you just gave me an extra week of life.
Yeah.
And that's, if you think about it, that's kind of what we're getting is like, suddenly we have all these programs giving you more DLS and you're getting more of this and better rendering power and more of that. And you can see, and it's more real. And you're like, yeah, but I needed to be creative in the way that I am creative. I needed to, like, listen, I never forget one time when I was with Charlie Hernandez, who was our
Mm.
production manager for Sting. And I was really, really freaking out because we were behind schedule. And he just looked at me and he said, Tupac, yeah, don't worry. And I was like, no, but the show is like, we have the musician and we have the songs. I could put him in the middle of a square at midday with nothing but a guitar, and people
Mhm.
are gonna still lose their minds,
Yeah.
right? And
And
that's the part that people forget when they're making all this technology. They're just thinking forward because they think that we need to arrive to that moment, when in reality, it's like, no, actually, it's okay if you want to slow down a little bit and come and meet us,
Mhm.
the creatives that are trying to understand how this technology can be best served to the story, to the
Mhm.
elements that we're trying to talk, to the things that we're trying to do. Making a robot do all this, right? It's not gonna make someone feel something. This is
Mm.
my biggest pet peeve with people on LinkedIn going, Seedance can now do this and sit down, and I'm like, yeah, great, but where's the bloody soul? Like, is that making you feel anything? Is there any character behind it? Is there anything element that comes with it? Right. And the more that we keep advancing, the more that we keep moving forwards, it's the more that I realize that there's a space and people that are stuck in the backside of it because the technology is moving so quickly that they can't catch up with that. And so their storytelling is now mediated by what the technology can do. Whereas usually, as artists, we understand what we want to do, and then we find the technology to do it. You know,
Mhm.
there's a reason why Andy Watson took 16 years to do a specific show for Radiohead because the technology
Mhm.
wasn't ready, right? There's a
Right.
reason it took me 5 years to make Nierka. There's a reason it took me so long to make Cosmos. Like, there's a reason to do all these things because when the technology is not ready, I'd rather not do it, right? I'd
Mhm.
rather not rush it just for the sake of saying I was the first one.
Mm.
But it has to be led by creativity. It can't be led by the technology people telling us what we need to do and the things that we should care about, you know, when in reality, it should be the artist saying, this is how we want to move forward. By the way, do you have anything that can work on this? And so, but I would say even the way that we're looking at the things that are coming out, the elements that are on screen, the things that are on theaters, like all these other elements, it's none of it is being dictated by the artist. All of it is being dictated for what the technologies are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so much of the technology we're seeing on LinkedIn and social media, it's a solution in search of a problem. It's like a tech for tech's sake. It's an exciting demo, but as you say, like it doesn't necessarily make you feel anything. And as storytellers, what, higher goal is there than making someone feel something? So this might be a good launching point to start to dive into some of your work as a storyteller. And maybe I actually really like the framing that you already set up. Like maybe we talk a little bit about the different pieces that you've created over the years and what technology was ready at each of those stages that made you feel like, okay, now I can tell unique, now I can tell cosmos within us, et cetera, et cetera. So let's launch into that however you like.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in some cases, I would say even the technology wasn't ready, but at least it
Sure.
was nascent, and we could see. I mean, that's the reality of tracking. That's the reality of the
Right.
aircraft. Tracking was not a thing. I remember being laughed at in Germany in January of 2011 for what I wanted to do, and people telling me you're not going to achieve it. Someone else
Mm.
talked to me in October of 2011 and said, Disney, Universal, Marvel, all these people are throwing money at what you're trying to do. What makes you think that you're the one that's going to make it and he's going to crack it? And I told
Mhm.
them it's because I'm looking at it from the creative side. I'm not looking at to do 10,000 things. I just needed to do 3 things correctly. And if it can do those three things right, that's all I needed to do. And whereas someone probably at Disney wanted to do this, that. I was just like, I just wanted to keystone, to track, and to zoom. That's it. And so why? Because those are the 3 things that I needed to do. It's like if we go back to this idea of like when you remember when you were doing 360 video, and people
Oh,
are
yeah.
trying to do things all over the 360 video, and it's like, you are not a dog, you are not like this. You live in a 90-degree world,
Yeah.
120-degree world, and if something's interesting, you move that way, and then you come back. And if something's interesting, you look that way, and and you come back. But it's not this idea that we're having to be hyper everything around it, right? So
Mhm.
like that for me is the starts of the aircraft. When we were doing Hiku, for example, right? Hiku is a piece of movement, and we wanted to understand how we're going to do this idea of someone moving across the space and generating this element of uh spatiality within projection mapping, right? Because I was like, I don't want to do things crumbling and moving and things like that because Mexico had just had a massive earthquake. So like that was a big no-no. So you had to be all about movement. And so we had already spent at that point, we're talking 2016, about 9 months looking at motion capture and what we could achieve with motion capture. And then we went to talk to the guys at Bath at Camera. And they were like, oh, well, the performance capture that we can give you, these are things that we do if we do it this way or that way, or what are the most important elements. And we knew that we needed to be subtle because we wanted to use hands and we wanted to be really close, but we knew that we didn't care about facial, for example.
Mhm.
We knew that we just wanted the body to move in a specific way in order to capture the most beautiful dancer in the world at that moment. And it's like, okay, that's the important thing. Like, I don't care about him smiling or not smiling or whatever, but if he does this, I need to catch that because that needs to come in, right? So what
Yeah.
is the correct technology for that? And so
Right. Yeah. You got a
it's
correct hierarchy of like what needed to
exactly.
work.
You start
Yeah.
creating
Yeah.
hierarchies and going, right, if it was facials and things like that, then suddenly maybe that's a completely different side that I go to. But
Mhm.
then because we storyboarded the whole show, like the whole piece is storyboarded from A to Z, and we didn't do a single shot that was not in that, right?
Mhm.
And the reason for it was because we were working with 30 different people across the globe in order to make the piece happen because we
Mhm.
were so short in time. And now this is prior to Unreal getting really, really good. So we were doing all of this in Cinema 4D and in Maya and some pieces in Houdini and then capturing everything from everybody else and then giving it a pattern so everything looked pretty much from the same space and then putting
Mhm.
all of that together, right? And then one of the most beautiful things about that piece is that it has a beautiful soundtrack made by a friend of mine, very, very beat heavy, which means he has a lot of lows. So it was presenting it in the street was not an option because you will lose all those lows with all the noise. So we ended up making an interview with a friend of mine who's a radio DJ. And then on time, he released the song just as the video was beginning in the facade. So there were people stuck in traffic watching the video with
Oh,
the audio coming in from the radio.
so clever.
And like I was like that actually makes it a lot more interesting for people to look at. So visually it was really interesting, but when you were in that space it just made everything so much different. And one of the restaurants that looked into the piece basically will run our track every 40 minutes so that if you were sitting in the bar having a meal, the music will tie up with that. And if you didn't know, you just thought that that was the coolest thing in the world. And I think that once again, moving into that analog to digital space is what makes all of this super interesting. You know,
Yeah.
when we move to do something like Cosmos comes from a completely different space, right? In Cosmos, we're thinking, how is it that we can make a performance piece in a headset, but
Mm.
also how can we expand the concept of a headset, right? And at that moment, everyone was thinking that multi-user had to be everyone on the headset at the same time. And we were like, no, if we already have a culture of people that are willing to watch Twitch to see people game,
Yeah.
right? What
Mhm.
is it that changes the idea of watching someone go through an experience? And so the fact that we're doing the experience live and it's me conducting and the voiceover is live and the musicians are live and the audio, the 11.2 surround sound system is live, and we have the two dancers with the haptics and the smells and all these kinds of things. That by itself is almost like watching a behind the scenes for everybody.
Mhm.
So then what is it that I need to give to the audience so that they feel that they're more part of the story? So it's like, okay, so we're going to give you the headset so you can see what the person can hear. But what we
Mhm.
understood was actually what was going to make the piece is giving them the headphones so that they could get the surround sound that was involving everybody. But then every single thing that the person heard, they could hear it here also. So in a way, it's almost like an audio book with visual cues that are relatable to what you're seeing, but you almost have a deconstructed view of that. And that kind of experiment, and I would say it began as a very nice experiment into it, is when we showed it in Venice, we had 4 people in the audience. And then little by little, we're like, oh, it'd be really cool to give them a cookie when we're giving the interactor a cookie, right?
Right.
And then, oh, we can give them the smells because they're so close to us. And then when we grew to an audience of 10, it was like, okay, we can still do this, but now something seems to be emerging. When we went to the Eye in Amsterdam, suddenly it was like, well, we have 115 people coming to see this. We cannot pass 115 cookies, right? Well, we're going to try, and we did.
Yeah.
We failed spectacularly to pass
Mhm.
115 cookies, but we tried our best. But then suddenly it was like, oh no, actually, I'm gonna involve now the audience to sing Happy Birthday, and I'm gonna trick them because the first time that they sing Happy Birthday, they're gonna think is this, and they're gonna finish. They're gonna go, oh, and then the second time they go around it, they're gonna think it's exactly the same story, and then suddenly they're gonna realize, and there's a completely different twist. And so now I
Yeah.
can play with them in that side, right? There's the moment where I have in cities, I will put a trumpet player to play outside of the theater so that people knew where to go. And then once they were inside, the trumpet player would go in and sit at the back of the room. And then in the scene where Lily dies, spoiler alert, when the cello begins, he grabs his trumpet and starts walking down as this macabre dance kind of thing. And then he is the one that plays the trumpet that lets us know that
Mhm.
Lily is dead. And so that for the person in the headset, it's just audio. For the people in the audience, it's like, oh crap. And so this idea of splitting the single story that we have, but how it affects you by being someone who's watching the piece in the physical space versus the person who is in VR seeing it in the virtual reality space, and how that changes our dynamic. That's something that we started playing with, and how we come with this idea with performative art, performance in different realities. Because that is really how all these things then start becoming something completely different. And in the climax for the physical reality is different than the climax for the person in the headset. You know, they're both gonna have that horrible moment climatic element into it. It just happens to be different for both of them. And
Yeah.
and I think that that's something that audiences and a lot of people are starting to realize that we need to do, because just being on the headset in the multi-reality type of space is not good enough, because we have a lot of limitations on the way that other people look, on the way that they are physical, and the way that they are in these spaces that we're behaving. But we are all humans that go to the theater. We know how to behave like that. We know how to behave at the cinema. We have all this knowledge that has been embedded in us from hundreds of years of doing the same thing. And so if we can tap into those spaces, then we can actually expand what we're trying to do.
When you think about things like virtual reality, to you, does it feel like an evolution of some of these existing mediums like film and theater and video games, interactive pieces? Or does it feel to you like an entirely different medium that needs its own
I think it's an entire
rules
different
and
medium that
experiences? Yeah.
is fed by different ways of doing things. And I would say if we take that as a different side, is like look at what Kip Williams is doing with the portrait of Dorian Gray, you know,
Mhm.
and how he's taking cinematic language and bringing it into theater, you know, and it's almost like you're not losing the theatrical element of what theater is. You're just adding this other different technological elements that come with it. And I think VR is exactly that. VR is this other entity that has its own language that is being discovered, you know, because it's not the same, like I said, to be looking around or to be doing this, or how do you move someone's gaze from the left to the right. But yes, there are elements of what cinema has done that we can understand from. There's elements of what we've done with, you know, interactive audio. There's elements that we've gotten from gaming. There's elements. So there's elements that we can learn from everybody because at the end of the day, VR is a combination of that. The thing about it is, though, now I think of VR not as the culmination of something, but actually based on everything that we're seeing and the fact that, let's be honest, the industry is not making any money still. You know,
Right.
concept of distribution is still stuck in the same space. And
Mhm.
so it's either A, we find a real way of doing it, or we understand that the medium has a limitation on everything else. And that actually VR is a great space to tell very interesting stories, but also to create workflows and to create new ways that then unlock other ways of doing. I'll give you the best example. All the work that I did in VR for Cosmos and
Mhm.
understanding with the team how to optimize scenes. When we moved into virtual production, it was exactly the same techniques. It was
Mhm.
exactly the same thing. So, boy, if you're not over there, you're not rendering that part. Why are you caching it in? Why are you not doing this? Why are you not doing that? And so then that becomes a very interesting element because you go, we have so much knowledge about how to make things run on a headset that barely has any memory, any RAM, or anything, so that when we go into bigger spaces, we can actually move that
Mhm.
knowledge to help us with it. Right. And for me, like that's what VR is truly becoming is a medium to find ways to tell stories, to find workflows, to find interesting things. Doesn't mean that you don't have to tell the story there. Doesn't mean that you can find meaningful stories into it. But the reality of it is it's impossible or near impossible to see pieces that are 2 years old, 3 years old. Right. And
Mhm.
so you cannot build an entire industry if whatever output is created is not being able to be seen 2 years later. You know, so if I turned around to you today and I went, Alex, have you seen Peaky Blinders, mate? You can just go to Netflix and you can
Right.
go
Watch it
watch
now.
from season one all the way through, right? You
Mhm.
cannot do that with VR. You know, and one of the saddest things that I heard the other day is that with all the changes that are coming from different headsets, as of today, you can no longer see notes on blindness.
Really? Wow. I remember seeing that on Gear VR back in like 2018. Jeez, that's a beautiful piece.
Because of all the changes that are happening within it, it means that the OS doesn't support a lot of the things that it needs, and therefore you can't see it. Like one of the most important pieces of the medium is now unaccessible. That's like
Yeah.
saying a movie done by pick your favorite by Kubrick
Mhm.
cannot be seen anymore because we do not hold the projectors to be able to show it to you.
Right. Yeah. It's a good analogy. Now, your work in particular, though, I think has even more of a tension with this than some other VR pieces because something like Notes on Blindness was always intended to be something that you experience in a headset on your own. It's not necessarily meant to be a big audience like watching it together as a live experience. Quite a lot of your work does seem to have this kind of like the best way to experience it is with a big group of people, either in a festival setting or a theater. So let's pretend for a second that the OS issue wasn't there. Would you be more interested in finding ways to distribute your work to a larger audience on like Steam or something like that? Or to you, is there something that would fundamentally get lost with someone experiencing Cosmos or any of your pieces on their own on demand compared to the live experience?
We've discussed this a lot of times, especially with Cosmos, because we were deciding whether or not we needed to do a standalone version of it, right?
Right.
And it's very powerful right now, but what we're doing with Kai, because
Mm,
Kai is a space first experience,
mhm,
right? It's the space is actually 80% of what you're about to see. Not
mm,
just because it's what you see physically, visually directly, immediately right away, but it's like the comforting element of what exists around you and how the environment changes with you, right? So in Kai is a completely, it's like, I think we arrived at that moment where I was like, people, when we were sending them the build, we're like, here's the build. But just to let you know, what you're about to see is technically only 15% of the piece.
right.
There's there are other machines that are doing audio and visuals and lighting and all these other protocols that we're using in real time that add to your mixed reality experience. And then there's this entire space that has the table, the fridge, the beers, the you know, all the books, the notes, the telephones, the journals that we wrote that enhance all the storytelling in the same way that if you went to a Punch Drunk show, for example, right?
Yeah, sure. I was just
And there
thinking
was
that.
and the set was nothing, but it was just a white canvas, and they would just come in and make you think that you are in a bar or you were in this. And like, yeah, sure, you can imagine it, but not to the level that they're trying to make you think about it, right? And that's kind of the best way I can explain how Kai works. Kai
Mhm,
is a piece that is created specifically to be physical, to be something that you can touch and you can grab and you can go as deep as you want to and pull back as much as you want to. Yes, the limitation in Kai is that it's only for one person, right?
mhm,
But there's that once again, the limitation is not because of me, the limitation is because of where the technology is, right?
mhm.
But when you look at a piece like Unique was basically this element where we went, right, this is what we learned from Cosmos. This is what we learned in performative art. So now let's go in and blow everything out of this, right? So whereas in Cosmos, we had the physical layer, so the people in the theater, and the VR layer, the person in the headset with their interactor. Suddenly we go into Unique, and in Unique is like you have the physical layer, the people that are watching us perform the piece and watch the visuals being created live. You have the AR layer, so you have an iPad, and around you there's things that are happening that you can look at. But by the way, your iPad is different to someone else's iPad because the JSON file is going to create all these different elements into it. Then you have the VR layer where people are putting the headset and they're moving in spaces that we are created in real time with the music. But so they are listening to the music, they're listening to us, but they're moving in worlds that no one else can see. And then we go into the stream, and in the stream is like we have three cameras that have augmented reality into it, which is different to the augmented reality that is in the iPads. So
It's
you can see at home things that cannot be seen in the space. And I love, like, finally someone sent me a message yesterday going, I finally understand what you mean. And I'm like, what? How? I was like, oh, I was watching Anima at Coachella and the girl was singing and the angel came out. And I thought that
yes.
everyone had seen the angel in the space. I was like, no, the angel was only for the people that were at home. Like that was their
Yeah,
plus. And they're like,
right.
yeah, now I understand what you were trying to do with Unique with the three cameras and the stream. And it's like, yes, I'm giving you content that no one else can have. It
Yeah.
being at home suddenly and watching the show is completely important to the ecosystem of what we're trying to do. And you're getting a premium experience by watching it that way, right? And then the
Mhm.
idea of having as mobile, and suddenly you are in your mobile or your computer moving through worlds somewhere else in the world, because you can be in Taiwan for all I care about. And you are moving into the worlds that we created, similar worlds to the guys that are in VR, separate because everyone has their own space. The JSON files are changing everything, right? And so I am, by the way I change the way that the guys are playing, I am changing the environment in which you're at. And because you are solely in your space, you're finding new harmonics and new things and new that, right? So suddenly we go from an audience of 200, 300, plus another 10 with iPads, plus another 10 with VR headsets, to suddenly thousands on the stream, to another 1,000 that can be playing in their own mobiles or computers or wherever you want. And then having that audio version also going out so you can listen to it with just a radio piece. Like suddenly it opens up and we are talking about thousands of people from a single performance, and the way that you experience that performance changes for you, and also changes the point of entry, because maybe you want to be in a VR headset, but maybe your wife wants to see it on the stream, and your son wants to play with it on mobile, and your mom wants to come to the theater to see it. Like everyone has a different point of entry, and everyone can enjoy it in the way that they want to. That for me is like, guys, this is the holy grail of what we're trying to create.
And this is the right way to use technology, where it is serving the interests of the story and not just like, "Oh, it's something cool," and doesn't actually do anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
The fact that the music is turned from the sound test into data to go to all these places, it means that it is still coming from humans. It is humans changing this environment. It is humans doing all these things. And the technology is just a conduit so that we can reach you in whatever you are.
Really well put. So tell me a little bit about what you're working on now, and then what you think about the general state of, XR and some of the technologies available to you. What's getting you excited? And yeah, if people want to be able to check out the kind of work you're doing, what's the next opportunity to do that?
So we just finished Kai.
Mhm.
It was unfortunately it got rejected by every single festival.
No, boo.
Not a single festival took it. I still claim is they didn't understand it.
Yeah.
Because whenever people come to see it, they go, "Oh, this is amazing. Why is it not in a festival?" And I go, "Well, I don't know." But that's a different story. But that taught us a lot, especially of the limitations of mixed reality. It taught us a lot about the things that are possible and not possible, on how I can create storytelling, how I can change different things, how I can give. I mean, one of the best, the funniest things is people were in it and they kept on moving their glasses up and down to make sure that that was
Mhm.
not real. We had so many
Love
people
that.
sit in chairs that didn't exist. Uh, you know, Walk into walls that they thought that they were fake. Don't know why, but they thought they were fake. uh, Interact with a character who did not exist and have
Mhm.
full conversations. Like I remember the first person that went in through it. The room is quite messy the first time you walk in, and so my character comes out, Chris comes out and says, "What would you like to have for dinner? Chinese, Italian, or should we just slam it and go for burgers?" And the first person turned around and said, "Why is your place so dirty, young man? This is not correct." And so then my character has to turn around and be like, "This is not a real human, right?" And he's going, "I'm so sorry. It's not what I meant, but but we're going out for dinner anyway. Tell me what you want to do." Like, no, 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 no. We have to talk about this mess that you have in here, young man. This is not
Wow.
possible. So, like I said, the understanding how the use of that AI agent into the character, and then moments where it's actually a pre-recorded actor, and moments where it's pre-recorded movement with an AI brain, and all those
Yeah.
things start really messing up with people's ideas of, is this is this person being puppeteer? Is there somebody that like it generated something really interesting into that, and so we're looking at where we're going to show it more as an independent site from us, so that people can actually get access to this thing that we have done. More than likely it'll
Mhm.
be a theater festival or something that will have us that is a bit more in the edgy ways of showcasing these things. We're in the middle of making a new piece that is a combination of, we call it cine dance theater. So
Mhm.
this idea of movie and movement and theater, but not only does the cinematic language exist in the theater space as it is, but actually there's an entire type of way of observing that story that is not by being in the physical theater.
Mhm.
And so how does that make the audience understand the story when you're giving them that kind of freedom, not freedom kind of thing? So it's very interesting. We're it's I've been working on the story for 22 years.
Wow. All right.
Once again, this is me
The
waiting
technology wasn't ready yet.
for the technology to actually be at a space that can actually be used for telling the story that I want to tell, rather than
Mhm.
rushing it for the sake of rushing it.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where that part of it. And then, like right now, I'm here at the Coaster Lab in Dundee, real
Yeah.
time lab, and
Yeah.
we're playing with things that I haven't seen anybody do, which is play with miniatures, not miniatures with a small screen, miniatures with a big screen, you know, and what are the things that you need to understand, and what are the elements that come into it? What are the techniques that we don't have to, like the first time that we did this test, you know, I think within an hour and a half, we were just like, oh crap, this is not the way to do it. We need to rethink the entire way of how we do it. And we came up with techniques. And then we got here now with better models, and we're like, okay, this is gonna work really good. It's like, oh no, okay, so we have to set this. And so the priority set this is like that, right? And so, you know, I think that when we start talking about performance and all this kind of new ways of doing things, I always claim that virtual production is it's like a child who was growing up, and then his father died, and he has 3 kids, like, you know, three brothers. And so his mom has to work. So he has to step up to be the man of the house. And so he's lost all this childhood because we've asked him to move up really quickly. And for me, virtual production is that. Virtual production was something that was nascent, that was interesting 2018, 19, and then pandemic happened, and then it became the savior of them all because it's the only way we can shoot all these things. And so there's a gap that exists that almost every single medium has, which is being playful without worrying about money, right? Nowadays, you go to a studio, that's going to cost you $15,000, $20,000 a day. Can you afford to go for 5 days and come out with nothing?
Yeah.
There's too many people that are asking for an MVP, or what is it that I'm going to see, or, you know, so the idea that we need to solve these things immediately passes the creative idea of that we might have, right? So solving it technologically is more important than solving it creatively. And so you can tell in virtual production what are the shows that have time to experiment and get things right, and what are the shows that are coming in and going, right, we need to shoot 20 pages today, guys. Like, you have an hour to relight the set and keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And so what we're trying to do right now here is actually taking the creative step back and going, right, this is what we want to do creatively. This is the things that we need to do. Okay, that's not correct. Okay, well, we can fix that asset. We can fix that thing. Okay, right now that's not correct. Okay, but what are the new rules that we need to come up with to actually expand the vocabulary of what can be done with virtual production, and then the way that then affects performance, and then the way that then that can be used with motion capture and volumetrics and Gaussian splats and all those kinds of things, right? But why bring an amazing asset if your parallax is not going to work? You know, so you're almost better off working in gray boxes and getting things sorted incorrectly in the way that you want them, so that that is creatively what you want to do. And then you go in and find out, okay, this is how we need to make this asset, and that's how we need to do that other thing, you know. But the element and the playfulness of sitting here, you know, we were sitting here with the guys 2 days ago, and the first 3 hours, I don't think we achieved nothing, right? And it was, but there was no panic because it wasn't like, it's not
You need space
about,
for it.
you need space for us to go and say, well, what if we try it this way? Well, that didn't work. Well, what if we try it that way? Well, that didn't work either. Okay, what is it? Why is it that every time that we do this, that never happens in the way that we think it's going to be, right? Most of the times, people have a client behind them going, what's going on? We're a producer. What's going on? Why is it not working? When are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? And so that pressure changes, and now you're going, well, let's go for the safe option because we know that the safe option works.
Right.
And so that for me is, you know, if anyone's about to take anything out of this entire thing, and this element is, forget about the tech. The tech is working, and we know it's working. And yes, there's things that don't work, and there's things that we don't have there yet. When they get there, we'll get there. But, you know, we can still put the artist in the middle at 12 o'clock, and he's going to have the songs, and he's going to deliver. The question is, do you have the songs? Not do you have the massive stage with all the screens and all the lighting. Is like, do you actually have the songs?
Yeah, you're reminding me of some of the conversations I've had with my father, who was in a rock band for 30 years. And he would talk about that premium of studio time and like how if you weren't prepared when you went into the studio, you felt the pressure of just burning money as you're there, like, oh, what should this verse be? Should we have a cello here? What do we do? And the more pre production time you get, the better, which of course also reminds me of things like the Lord of the Rings trilogy versus The Hobbit and the massive amount of pre production time Lord of the Rings had versus like everything with The Hobbit was like laying the tracks down right in front of the film. So in all these creative disciplines, just the benefits that come from having the space and the time and the resources to do R&D and see what works and what doesn't, and then adjust and say, you know what, this part of the script doesn't make sense anymore. Like, let's actually revise that. So it's great that you carve out the time for that. I've got an interesting question for you, Tupac. Let's imagine someone gives you some like James Cameron money, like billions of dollars to not that this actually happens to James Cameron because he complains about restrictions all the time. But let's pretend someone gives you several billion dollars and it's just like, Tupac, you're an amazing artist. I just want to see what you create with this. What do you think you would do with that? And I'm particularly curious about the R&D side of it and like what kinds of things do you think you would experiment and play with as you find your way towards spending an insane amount of money on something that's gonna, be a great story.
So I'll tell you this. First of all, if James Cameron happens to listen to this that we're talking about, I would
Yeah.
love for him to donate all his knowledge of performance capture
Oh,
to what
yeah.
we're doing on this side, right?
Amazing.
If he wants an altar to be behold and created as a statue, please give us all your performance capture knowledge so we can invest it into what we're doing right now in the theater, in ballet, in opera, so that the performing arts can actually grow bigger because we can now offer the performance capture that dancers and actors need in order for us to create these stories, right? Because we know that that's a massive limitation in the sense of what we're
Oh,
doing. So that aside,
yeah.
um, I will probably create the biggest sandbox you can imagine,
Mm,
right? And I remember that one time some of the guys gave me a bit of crap at the studio because I wrote like the best way I can put it is like a single level of Synecdoche in New York, in
mhm,
which
yeah.
things are happening and there's like yes, there's elements of writing that need to be understood. There's elements of music that need to be understood. There's elements of capture that need to be understood. But just like just capturing for the sake of capturing is like, no, I need the subtle capture movement in order to survive. But it's not correct if I get this subtle capture movement and the words that are coming out of their mouth is not correct because it needs to
Mhm.
be a matchup of what works on camera doesn't maybe work on performance capture. This is the reason why even Cameron and the guys at Weta spend so much time cleaning up that movement so that
Yeah.
the words and the movement actually match in a more specific way. And so I think that if I was giving the gazillion dollars out of it, like it's almost like how do you make that element of creativity, that element of art truly be served by the technology that it's available so that you can be running an R&D project that is about a dancer and getting that to a level that you can then put on a headset and you can watch that performance in the way it's supposed to be. Or how is it that you can do an opera, and allow for that opera to exist in an entire space and room? And what does that mean for the audio? And what does that mean for headphones? And what does that mean for audiences? And when people sit and when people move and, I will basically make a massive I think that the final output would probably be this incredible immersive theater performance with immersive technologies and the headsets and things like that to exist. I've written
Mm.
that piece already. You know,
Of course
funny
you have,
enough,
yeah.
I've written that piece already. I just don't have the money to do something like that. But even then we know that to make that piece, there's about 6 or 7 strands of R&D that need to be done so that we can
Mhm.
understand it. Kai for us is 10, 15 workflows that no one had ever tested. And now
Okay.
we know how those work. And that's what we were able to make the piece that we've made. That for the next step of what I want to do with that, it really needs different strands. It's not just let me learn mocap. Let me learn Gaussian splatting. No, it's like, yeah, it's Gaussian splatting, but there's like someone telling you there's electronic music and you categorize everything as electronic music. And then someone comes to you and goes, no. There's house, there's deep techno, there's minimal, and it's like, that's the thing, is it's not just the immersive technologies. Oh yeah, no, of course not. It's this. And then it's like, no, it's this and it's this. And it really becomes this onion that you need to peel in so many different ways. And then you have to reconstruct it with all the new knowledge that you have in order to actually make the thing that you want to do.
Yeah, that's really well put. Amazing. Well, this has been a really excellent discussion. I want to make sure people know best ways to find you, best ways to get in touch. If someone is like, Tupac, I want to collaborate, like, let's make sure we get emails and LinkedIn and that kind of stuff in there too.
If James Cameron wants to collaborate, he can.
Yeah.
I mean, socials, Tupac Martir, Satori Studio. It's the easiest place to probably contact us and to get in touch if they want anything. I do have a podcast, which is quite funny, called Glyph, in which I've interviewed people that are really not well known in the industries, outside of the industries, but within their industry, they're very well known. And that's another way that we're trying to give a voice to people that maybe have changed your life and you have no idea that they changed your life. And so, I can also be contacted through the podcast. But yeah, it's just, if anybody wants to get in contact, obviously we're always keen to work and to listen to people and to, we're actually going to open our academy, because we do a lot of mentorship programs within the studio, and so that's coming out very soon for the next cohort. So you have to do a submission, and then there's an interview, and then I think we're going to start the actual mentoring around September, and it takes about 6 months of our life.
Wonderful. And by the way, I don't think we ever mentioned, you are in Lisbon right now, or where are you?
I am in Lisbon. I am in London sometimes, and now I can be found in Dundee.
Yes, in Dundee as well. Wonderful. And my dog is telling me it's just about time for us to wrap up here. But this has been such an excellent conversation, Tupac. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you to our FMX audience. Thank you to Patricia and Mario and everyone who's organized the event. Would love to get Tupac over to FMX in person next year, should we be so lucky, and maybe we can get Kai or one of these other pieces a little bit more of an audience. That'd be great. Thank you so much, Tupac, and
thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody, and speak soon.